I want to say this to you, that one of the reasons that Tougaloo College physically exists as it does today is because when Sherman went through Mississippi after the war, they couldn't see Tougaloo because it was shrouded with brush, trees, and those kinds of things. And I'm sure nobody ever knew that we would be standing here talking about that institution the way we are today. However, Jerry and I were thespians together at Tougaloo. We were the best. Dr. Townsend really thought we were going to Hollywood. Okay. When I went to Tougaloo as provost the first time, it actually wasn't even called provost. It had three titles or something, but that's what it meant. Jerry was there, had been there for a while. He'd had to wait his turn on tenure, even though the board had approved it, because of guidelines that somebody made after having a night out. So I understood Tougaloo from a different vantage point. I knew how much money we didn't have. I knew what the salaries were. So I left and I went to Dillard University, where I demanded upfront this great budget. So I called Jerry and I said, pack your stuff. Sorry. Pack your stuff. Pack your stuff and get in your car. I want you down here at Dillard. And he said something that didn't make sense, but even though we were students at Tougaloo, I'm still a little bit older. But you look at those thespian, those photos from the time that we were actor and actress, we don't look the same. His hair is gray now, mine is colored. But anyway, I said, you just, come on down. I want you to do some of the same things here that you've done at Tougaloo. So it didn't take much because of his early connection with New Orleans, and he came down and, I just did there's some privileges I had. So as full professor and tenure at Dillard University. And some of the Dillard students would say the same kinds of things you've heard this morning. I know they would because I've heard them. Anyway, so I made it real comfortable for him to come to Dillard with a salary that he could not ever have imagined at Tougaloo. But when I went back on the campus, one of the trustees said to me, "You're not welcome here on your own." Not seriously. I wouldn't have accepted seriously. But because I took Jerry away. However, the thing about mentoring, as everybody up here has talked about, but first, before I say that, the second 2 or 3 months after I got to Tougaloo as provost the first time, I went to the coast to speak at Jerry's mother's funeral. I wear often a piece of her jewelry that Jerry gave me. So we've been close. We argue and fight, but we just love each other so much. He's tried the same thing on me, by the way, you all. you know, to the point that I don't know whether I need to send any more manuscripts so we can stay friends. But whatever the case, he's one of the finest human beings I know, and one of the finest ones that not only that Tougaloo will ever have, but so will HBCUs. He is just a fantastic human being. You can tell he's given his students voices to know themselves and to know what they could do and how far they could take themselves, you know, because mentoring is not about trying to make somebody in your own image. It's about having students understand their own. And that's what he has done. And for that, Cynthia and all of you here, I would like to go on and present this to Jerry in love from all of us, Jerry.
So I'd like to go ahead and reconvene from our lunch break. And before we get started, I'd like to take this opportunity to extend a special note of gratitude to our moderators for the luncheon plenary, Made McGee and Donna Kibas Olivet. And so, as we get started, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce to some and reacquaint with others, our illustrious panel. First, we have Jamal Calloway, who is a systematic theologian. His dissertation focus title is But Not in Despair, A Black and Womanist Defense of Faith in a Someday. He is a member of the Tougaloo College Club. And his MMUF mentor was Dr. Laura Ashton. He entered in 2009 with the cohort of 2009. And for his graduate education, he attended Union Theological Seminary in the city of New York. Right. He is a newly minted PhD. Next, not in order, but we'll skip over to this side of the table, we have Dr. Jonathan E. Collins. He is a political scientist, and his dissertation focus, or title, was Talking in the Halls, Deliberative Democracy, Local Institutions, and School Board Governance. He is a graduate of Morehouse College, entered also in the cohort of 2009. His mentor is Dr. Dolores Stevens, and has graduated with his PhD from UCLA. Then, right between them, we have Dr. Callista Kelly, who received her PhD in education with a dissertation titled Steering Success, Highly Effective Majority Black Charter Schools and Their Leaders. For undergrad, she went to Payne College, where Dr. Janice Trollinger was her mentor for the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship Program. For graduate school, she attended the Claremont Graduate University, and she received her PhD in 2016. So we're both class of 2016. Yay! Still newly minted. Then to my left, I have Dr. Kimberly Love, who works in the disciplinary areas of English, African American literature, and 20th century American literature. Her dissertation title is To Be Loved in Christ's Shame, The Legacies of Race and Shame. And for undergrad, she attended Tuskegee University, where Adaku Ankuma was her mentor. She entered in the cohort of 2008 and attended UVA, University of Virginia, for graduate school. She is a newly minted PhD. Next to her left, I have Dr. Lisa Young, who is in the disciplinary area of American Studies. Her dissertation title is Lethal Housing, Reading Restrictive Covenants and Urban Black Women's Grassroots Health Activism, 1930 to 1980. She is a graduate of Claflin University, where Stephanie Spalding was her mentor, and we all entered in the same cohort of 2008. Her graduate institution is Purdue, and she is a newly minted PhD. And then, last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Joy Hightower, who is a sociologist with a dissertation titled The Desired Unsung, Black Middle-Class Men and Intimate Relationships. She is a graduate of the Spelman College, where Mona Phillips was her mentor. She entered the Miller Mays Undergraduate Fellowship Program in 2006 and attended University of California at Berkeley for her graduate education. She is a newly minted PhD. One more round of applause. And so what I'd like to do is ask the fellows that we have here a few questions to go ahead and get your thoughts going, get your questions going about what it takes to be an effective mentor, what they have found extremely helpful, what they would encourage you to do further, and basically how to cultivate best practices. So our first question for anyone who wants to take it up first is to name a few things that you wish you knew as an undergraduate once you got to graduate school.
I'll jump in. And just the one thing that immediately comes to mind is how the culture can be very different at some of the PWIs that we tend to go to attain the doctorate degree. And particularly, so, at Morehouse it was an environment where, and I was talking to, I think Camille and I were talking about this, I was talking to Camille about this, it was very, communal, and your relationships with your professors, it was more family oriented, and that wasn't necessarily the case in graduate school. I think you have to be prepared for that mentally, and also be prepared for the fact that the faculty at some of these other places really take things seriously, and the way that they communicate with you about the things that they take seriously might not always be direct. So there's a way about that you have to go about the process, of just conducting yourself, the things you say, and the people you align yourself with, that you have to be very careful about, that I didn't really understand, because the department at Morehouse, the collegiality even within the departments and across departments, it was very different. The relationships were, they were tighter. There, people can be more territorial, and you have to be ready for the fact that people are territorial about the department they're in, the type of research that they do, and you have to be very careful about navigating that terrain.
I'll also add to that two things I learned that I wish I had known about was the hidden curriculum and allyship, identifying allies, because so directly after graduating from Payne, I actually enrolled simultaneously in two MA programs, but I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just sort of doing what I was told. So one at Purdue University, another one at Middlebury College's Breadloaf School of English. And so I did Breadloaf in the summers, I did Purdue in the fall, and I made a mess of my programming experience at Purdue because I did not have allies. It was a cultural shock, and I wasn't prepared for interacting with students who looked differently and also thought differently than I did. And so not having allies, it became a very lonely experience. And I wish I had that knowledge to look for people who would support me. I didn't really do that until the very end of my program, unfortunately.
I think just to add a little bit to what both of the other people have stated, is I think it's really important to understand that oftentimes when you're in graduate school, you interpret that different culture as intellectual inferiority. And so it takes a really long time, unless you're already sort of attuned to those differences, to be able to distinguish what's really happening to you. And that it has nothing to do with your preparation specifically, and everything to do with the performance of being in graduate school. And so just helping students along that process, I think, is really, really important. I'm not sure if people, well, at least in my experience, I didn't maintain my connection to my Mellon undergraduate advisor. She was wonderful. But I think once I got to graduate school, she just thought that I would find support, and that was not the case. And so I would just like to really stress, check in with your mentor, even though it's not your responsibility to do that. I feel like it was mine. And she just assumed that I didn't need her in the same way. But I needed someone who could really help me distinguish the difference between a mentor and an advisor. And that advisors have a particular purpose, and they're not necessarily invested in you in this holistic way that we've been talking about. And so when we come from HBCUs, we're used to those two being married and paired, and we never have to question whether or not our professors are invested in us as human beings and not just as brains, right? And so when you get to graduate school, you are often challenged to really see yourself in a different way when you're afraid to talk in class, when you're not necessarily the top student anymore. And so you begin to say, who am I? And was my experience at my undergraduate school even real? And so I think, just to be honest, the culture, the apparatus that Mellon Mays provided is really how I refashioned that experience, even though it wasn't at my graduate school in particular, and then also creating community, which someone else just spoke to, on campus, and also maintaining connections with people in the community where my school was located was really important for me.
So for me, the advice that I wish I would have received, that I didn't, was the very changing nature of the academy. That is the professionalization of the discipline. From the minute I got to grad school, it was publish or perish. So can you imagine coming in, and this might be endemic to Berkeley, but can you imagine coming in as a first year and you're coming from an environment where it's about ideas? Do you have a good idea? Can you contribute these ideas to larger theoretical discussions and perhaps being able to devise solutions to, ideas are okay, but if you don't actually share them with maybe 10 people who might actually end up reading the article, then those ideas really don't mean anything, because grades don't mean anything. And so there was a very big shift, right? In the first year, you're trying to figure out, what do I actually want to do research on? Who am I going to connect with? And that's the second point that I'll make. Networking is vital. I thought about that in the corporate sense, but did not realize that even within the academic space, it's really about who you know. So there was a point in time when I was deciding that I still wanted to be a professor in a traditional sense. And so it was advised that you should reach out to people. And that was not any advice that I had received explicitly. So just be mindful that you are going to be expected to publish, at least in the social scientists, and certainly in the STEM fields. That's a clear expectation, but that's certainly changed in the social sciences. And by networking, I mean always attending conferences, always presenting your work, reaching out to people to sit and have lunch when you're at the conference.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, thanking Dr. Spence, Dr. Jackson, Dr. Eldridge.
Just like a preacher.
Protocol, right? I think for me, I don't want to say that I wasn't told, but one thing I wish I had taken more seriously is the issue of mental health. And what type of toll does this take? This transition from your HBCUs to certain PWIs, what type of toll does it take on your mental health in regards to trying to find your confidence, uprooting? I think one thing we take for granted at our HBCUs is that your mentors, your professors, and your classmates all want well for you, all want you to be okay at the end of the day. And that assumption goes away in the transition. You may receive the same sorts of red marks and edits that you would receive from a Jerry Ward, but you can't assume the same love and compassion that you would honor a Jerry Ward. And so what type of resources does one have to sort of accumulate, and what type of practices does one have to start instilling in their daily lives? What type of therapists and what type of people can they talk to? Those are the types of questions and things that I wish I had taken more seriously in my initial transition into graduate school.
I can answer.
Sure.
So, one of the things that I kind of wish that I've gotten some advice on was being very strategic about how I wanted to use my graduate school experience and what I wanted to get out of the PhD and how I wanted the PhD to work for me. So when I first got to Purdue, I took this experience as, let me see what, like, I think I was more passive in my graduate school experience, especially the first couple years, and I wasn't as direct about what I wanted to get from the university and how the university could help me to the next level. I think part of that was not calling or relying on those mentorships that I got from other people who were very strategic about how they went about their graduate school career, even if it was like, you know, something as specific as like studying abroad, right, or getting some kind of experience. For me, I knew I wanted to think outside the academy, so during my third year, I applied for a summer researcher, a summer policy position with the U.S. Department of Transportation, and I had to prove, or when I brought it to my advisor and told her I wanted to apply, her first thing was, I don't want you to do this because it's going to take away time from you writing. And I had to tell her how this was related to my idea of praxis, because I do housing segregation, and why it was important for me to have that insight and that policy experience. And that ended up being one of the most, like the most beneficial experience that I've had, having that, because I've never worked a day outside of like dealing with the university, right? So all of my job experiences had to deal, were in some relationship with a university. And so being outside of that and being able to see what I liked about academia and what I didn't like, and also how I could leverage that to get to another point in my career was very important. So just like talking to people who've kind of been on this path, but are also thinking about how to using their PhDs in another expansive way other than just academia. And being intentional about that when you first get in, if that's your goal.
So Lisa, thank you for making that segue for me, right? Because I want to shift a little bit into talking about transitions. So we've talked about kind of moving from an HBCU to a PWI for graduate school, but what does your journey look like as you try to move on to the job market, whether that's the academic job market, the post-academic job market? What does that look like right now for you?
Stress.
If you'd be willing to share even just a bit of a narrative, right? Outline what it looks like.
Yeah, I'll share. Unless you were about to.
Go ahead.
For me, that journey didn't just start, when I was nearing the end. For me, I've always had one foot in and one foot outside of the academic door, if you will. The foot outside, I didn't know exactly where it would lead me. But probably about a little over a year ago, I made the decision that I was going to go the post-academic route. But I was going to take all of the skills that I had really developed in the past, 6 years at that point, into corporate diversity and inclusion strategizing. That field, as we know, has been around. It's even at our various academic institutions at these PWIs. However, we know that what they're doing isn't working. And so the way that I was pitching myself was through a data-driven approach to create diversity strategic initiatives. And so corporations do surveys all the time, but they don't really deep dive on already identified opportunity areas. And so when I made that decision, I just started going to every tech. I wanted to go into corporate tech or corporate biotech. I just started going to every tech conference that had an emphasis on diversity and inclusion or HR or leadership and development. And I just started putting it out there that that's what I was going to do. And I didn't make it like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this, or do you think I could fit? Because I know that industry doesn't really understand me. And so I applied to a series of jobs, but interestingly enough, where I'm at Genentech, there was a Morehouse man who was the head of diversity and inclusion there. And I met him through a younger Morehouse brother. This is all through networking in the Bay Area. And through those series of conversations, they offered me an internship. The Morehouse brothers stepped down abruptly from the role, so everything was put on hold. But it's interesting how the universe was working, because all of the positions that I was applying for, they were in diversity and inclusion, but I was being pegged in a particular way because I was going to be coming out with a PhD. So that is, people wanted me on the D&I teams, diversity and inclusion, but they wanted me to be analyst. And then if anyone knows me, they know that I'm a big thinker, I'm a thought leader. So me sitting in front of a computer doing Excel is not a great use of my talents. And so I was almost going to take one of those positions just to get my foot in the door, but then this internship came about, and it's exactly what I wanted to do, which was to be a researcher on a diversity and inclusion team. And so I took it, even though it was an internship, and it has since converted into an actual role. And so I'm still doing research, just in a corporate setting. It's happening much quicker. It's impacting, 3 or 5 year HR strategic initiatives. It's touching many different aspects of the business. I'm still very much so rooted in the community in a way that I didn't feel that I was when I was laboring to get this PhD, and that might be going back to some of the mental health, issues that were brought up. So it's really just an amalgamation of everything that I was trying to do while I was working on the PhD, that I didn't feel that I could do because the limitations of publish or perish.
Are there any other sort of job market narratives? And now this applies to both postdocs, of which we have 1, 2, 3 on the panel, and tenure track positions, of which we have 1 on the panel. Lisa?
So last year, I went on the job market for the first time, and it was very interesting, but also very brutal, because being assessed in every way, in a lot of ways, is very unnerving for me. From the CV to the cover letter, all these different things that represent who you are. It was almost like a dissecting of how much I had contributed. But I will say that what really helped me towards the latter part of that, in order to narrow down and focus what, how I was actually going on the job market, was one, the Ford conference. It was almost like, I remember when I was there for the first time last year, someone made the comment that being at the Ford conference was like being given a key to a door in academia that you never knew existed. It was like this way of understanding the academy that isn't necessarily always transparent. So being able to actually just go up to people and talk to them about their research, but also being able to ask for things that I had never asked for before, so examples of cover letters, research statements. That networking piece allowed me to be very strategic and specific about going on the job market, and also just Mellon's influence. So I did preparing for the professoriate, and one thing that came out of that was I needed to highlight my values and make sure that my values kind of corresponded to the places that I was applying to. So to get out of the mindset of thinking about this job search as, you know, the job is choosing me, but I'm choosing the job. So I'm being proactive in saying, for instance, what is it about me? What is it about this institution? What is it about this location that is important for me? And so, yeah, just changing my dynamic about, like, you know what, I have agency. I can be more in control and not just do like this massive sweep of like applying to every job, but being very strategic and intentional. And also like utilizing those networks and people who are at those institutions or have been there before.
True. And then also, really quick, speaking of networks, just something that Lisa referred to, preparing for the professoriate is a service that's provided for your fellows. Once they graduate and move into graduate school, they are sort of graduated into the Social Science Research Council. And there is a suite of Mellon programming that's provided for them there, sort of job preparation activities, as well as continued stipend support.
One thing that Dr. Spence and Dr. Harper helped me with as a Mellon is understanding that while I was there in 2009, that I was already a scholar. That I wasn't working towards becoming a scholar. I was already one working on my particular work, my particular field. And so I translated that into understanding that I am, as a PhD student, I am a systematic theologian. I am a philosophical theologian as I am. And I'm applying to certain positions that are open to hiring me to continuing the work that they need and that they're doing. And so I went on the job market applying to tenure track positions and postdocs last year. I was actually headed to Fordham as a postdoc, but one of my mentors from Yale Divinity School had my CV, and he called and just offered me the Brown postdoc. I actually never applied to be at Brown University. I didn't know what the Center of Race and Ethnicity in the Study of America was at Brown, and so he and his wife, Dr. Tricia Rose, took my CV to the provost and asked if they could bring me on. And I ended up going to Yale Divinity School as opposed to other graduate schools that I was accepted into because my Mellon mentor said that he knows the trajectory that I'm on and the type of scholar that I'm becoming, and the other schools that I was actually going to select would not fit me. So I switched at the last second to a particular field because of my Mellon mentor.
So I want to tell this story because I think it provides context to sort of my trajectory, my journey. So Dr. Smith, I don't know if you remember this, but okay, so my mom, she has a high school diploma. My dad, he graduated from Georgia State, so he has a bachelor's degree. And when I was a fellow, and we were doing the Summer Institute, I shared with the group that my mom said something that was just horrifying to me, and it sort of broke my heart. And she said, well, all a PhD is a piece of paper. And it was Dr. Bird, his words, his encouragement to tell me that it was much more than that. He didn't give me the language then, but I know it now, social capital. It gets me into doors that otherwise I would not be able to get into. It gets me seat at the table that I wouldn't otherwise be able to sit at. And so I'm really grateful for Dr. Spence and Dr. Bird for just for being formational for me in terms of my development into a scholar. So now, upon graduating with the PhD, I thought, oh yeah, I'm gonna go and achieve that mission. It was well ingrained. Okay, so getting the PhD and going into the professoriate and going onto that tenure track, and that didn't happen for me. I just thought it was, but it didn't. I actually ended up going into development, so fundraising. I love what I do. It actually, while I was a graduate student, I identified a need on campus, and it was for Black graduate students and funding. They needed funding, and so while I was doing my reading and my studying and writing, I was actually meeting major donors and talking to them about this need, and ended up raising enough money to get a fellowship endowed, and turned some heads because of the work that I did. And so now we have a fellowship for Black graduate students in perpetuity at my alma mater. And so I'm really happy about that work. Thank you. So I'm really happy about that work because it's, for me, it really helped me to understand sort of that divide between theory and practice, and really seeing things and doing things rather that would have great impact and implications long after I'm gone from this institution. And that was sort of what drove me to doing what I do now. In addition to, I kind of asked my VP, I asked him for two things. I asked him for a yacht, because I wanted someplace to host my graduation party, and I asked him for a job, and so he did both for me. So that was part of why I am where I am. But I do feel some guilt, though. I do. I feel like I've failed the mission. And not going in terms of the traditional academic route. So I'm hoping to do that, though. Yeah. So.
Before Jonathan goes, though, I think that in our Q&A period, you'll experience a few rebuttals to that idea. Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, to kind of already start a rebuttal to that, right? A lot of this stuff is just luck and randomness and blessings from God, and timing. I mean, so many things that are beyond our control. So, the thing that has been the one kind of consistent thing throughout my transition to the various stages has been the thing that I kind of learned from the very beginning from my mentor, Dr. Stevens, and the Spensation. Right, because you do the work. I mean, they come up with a plan for you to go about the process of doing the work. You come in as a fellow, you go to the Summer Institute. There's 8 weeks where it's designed for you to focus on the work. You get unlimited library time, access. You do the work. You meet periodically with your mentor. You shop your work amongst your colleagues. You're already building up the habit of doing the work. And that is what is going to carry you throughout the process. So like when I got to graduate school, everything went wrong. Like everything, it seemed like almost everything that could go wrong went wrong, right? Like I get to graduate school. First off, I didn't even get into a PhD program when I first applied. I applied to like 20 and got into none. Then I did a master's at UCLA because I met a professor there who was the chair of the Afro department and was like, well, I see some promise in you. Come on to UCLA, I'll train you. So I spent a year there, and then the political science department asked me to apply and join the department the next year. So so I'm like, oh, cool, I made it, right? I'm in graduate school now. Right? I'm gonna get my PhD after all. Right, cool. Then my advisor goes on medical leave, like in my second year. I'm like, okay. Then I finally find another advisor because no one in the department would work with me. No. I was like kind of an outcast. I was just doing my own thing. I had these weird ideas that people didn't really know what to do with. They didn't know how to make sense of it. I was kind of just ostracized. Then I met this one guy who was a dean, and kind of took me under his wing, but he didn't have a lot of time because he was a dean. But he worked with me a little bit, and then I finally got things on track. Then he leaves UCLA to become a chancellor at another university. So I finally thought I got to this place. Right, but here was another setback. But the thing that he kept telling me was the same thing that Dr. Stevens and the Spensation had been saying the whole time. Focus on the work, focus on the work. So as things started to happen, I still maintained the work ethic. I came in every day, I treated it like a job, 9 to 5 plus hours, right? It wasn't always pretty, but I got better every day. I didn't even feel like I was getting better, but I did. I got better every day, every year. So ultimately, I find a dissertation committee. UCLA happens to hire a couple people who come in, don't know anything about me. They want to work with me. Cool, I formulated a committee. I randomly meet a person who is doing a survey project on school board superintendents, and I was doing a dissertation on school boards. I get on the survey project. I come up with data probably 3 years earlier than I probably should have. And I start writing, and I'm shopping my work, and I keep an updated website, also something good for young